Concord died solely due to DEI. The shill corporate journalists will say, there is just no place for live service games. In a year when First Descendant, Zenless Zone Zero, Helldivers 2, Pal World all blew away expectations, hero shooters simply cannot do well due to oversaturation, despite the dwindling of Overwatch 2 making this perhaps the most perfect year for Concord to release, and Marvel Rivals proved that with a beta in lockstep with Concord that was a huge success. Journalists cannot figure out how this game failed, throwing out every theory in the book despite proof of other games, with the same problems they identify striking it rich. Yet the one reason everyone knows, everyone recognizes as a game killer, and everyone has been talking about since the trailer, journalists aren't permitted to even mention by their cult leaders. Now, there are bad parts to this game beyond the visuals, like the combat, and the pretty much everything else in the game, yet you couldn't spit on Twitter without hitting someone praising every other aspect of the game they themselves refused to play because it was awful, while trying to downplay how the characters look like your grandma's closet after a tornado. Concord reportedly spent between $100 to $250 million and 8 years to make, one of the most costly games of all time, and absolutely the worst flop in gaming history. That's a loss ratio of, let me check my notes, 100%, making it worse than games like Redfall, Kill the Justice League, Avengers. It took a week for Concord to be hitting 24-hour peaks of 30 people. That's almost one player per hour. So am I saying this game failed solely due to DEI? Yes. Before you mistake this to simply the character design, which focused on social justice propaganda, ugly-looking models, and hideous thrift store outfits, I am not saying that is the reason this game has failed. DEI is not about making a game that looks like Concord. DEI is about making a studio that looks like Concord. The problem that AAA studios are now facing is not that they made a bunch of DEI games that look horrible, that gamers don't want, and that all bomb. That's a temporary problem. A bad game or patch is one good cinematic or game away from being forgotten. Trust me, I played World of Warcraft, the roller coaster of public opinion. If you look at the staff photos for every big AAA studio, you'll see a massive difference between 2010 and 2020, and you'll notice every single one of them has changed in the exact same way. Even if the entire AAA games industry had an epiphany, and suddenly realized making games full of bouncy babes like Stellar Blade's Eve or the girls from Dead or Alive, and badass guys like Leon, Solid Snake, and the Space Marines or Master Chief is what gamers want, they will not be able to make those games. They could make games that look like them, but they will still feel like DEI games. They will have that DEI lack of polish, that DEI bugginess, and that DEI obnoxious UI. Open world, hand-holding, telling you what to do all the time, no social choice on rails, cinematic, slop style. Games today are not made to be as simple as possible to keep on track because gamers want it. Elden Ring proved that in spades. It's made to handhold you from task to task because developers need it, because they cannot make something naturally intuitive. Just think about how many of them were blowing their own gaskets over Elden Ring not having arrows pointing you everywhere, or dozens of menus and controls taking up half the screen. Elden Ring has one of the best UIs ever as voted by gamers, but one of the worst as voted by games devs. These people can't make games for gamers even if they were told to, and feel very threatened when another game does so. DEI kills the studio. It's not that they made a bad game, it's that they can only make bad games. It was easy to pivot to DEI, short for discrimination, egotism, and ignorance. All you need to do is fire people who are not correct diverse, and hire people who are correct diverse. It is impossible to pivot out of DEI. Getting rid of a bunch of devs whose goal is activism is like removing hundreds of warts from your taint. The hero shooter is literally named after two things, and the hero part was utterly failed. Love or hate Overwatch, it completely nailed character design in every way, and had complete diversity, with men and women who embody a variety of charm, sexiness, coolness, badassery, and you can tell what the heroes do at a glance. McCree is clearly a damage dealer. Reinhardt is a massive tank. Clearly Mercy by name, and her angelic visage is a fisticuffs bruiser. Concord heroes were a mess, with mismatched attitudes, roles, and design silhouettes. Concord is ugly, the DEI designs are unpleasant to look at. And how does a hero shooter make money? Selling cosmetics through gambling crates? Or on the store at jacked up prices? They thought a dude in a battered life jacket was going to become the mascot of the biggest new franchise because he has a quirky personality trait, like hot sauce. Ha 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 ha, oh, he likes hot sauce, that's so funny. Goatee of the year, how could this ever fail? Sony didn't think it could. They bought the studio over this game. There are people making 7-figure salaries who looked at this game and thought, hey, this is going to be one of the biggest games of all time. This game shut down in 2 weeks. DEI is not about making some awful looking characters with ambiguous looks, with obnoxious attitudes. That's just a symptom of the people who make decisions at these companies. It's about ingraining systemic discrimination into the corporate culture. The point of DEI is not to put the Willy Wonka Blueberry Kid or Buzz Heavyyear in a hero shooter. The point is to put a blue-haired land whale in every workstation. Sony removing Concord is like taking a cough drop for the flu. If they don't remove the systemic discrimination they just installed in their company, Sony will be making Concords for years to come. And we don't have to wait long for you to see what I mean, because Haven's Fair Games is coming out soon. And I'm gonna pull Paul Heyman right here. This is just another disaster in the making. Sony has already confirmed they have confidence in the game, just like they did with Concord. Fair Games, if released on its current trajectory, will completely and utterly bomb and be dead in months. That's not a prediction, that's a spoiler. But DEI isn't even just about killing the company, it's an industry killer. Notice how no journalist talked about the costume and character design being a massive issue with the game, how every single one of them skated around the issue, yet trailers, social media was the #1 topic. Gamers and journalists were having completely parallel, non-bisecting conversations about this game before it even released, when gamers were making it very clear the game wasn't for them, and journalists were acting like this was a very promising product. After it died, journalists, experts treated its failure like the most perplexing mystery on the planet. Gamers are not to blame for this. It is not the responsibility of gamers to buy games. It is the responsibility of devs to make games we want to buy, and the responsibility of journalists to provide useful information for gamers. It is peak hubris to have journalists and devs refuse to do their jobs, and then shift any blame to so-called toxic gamers. And this is what has caused trust in AAA studios and games media to evaporate. If you work at this studio, instead of blaming the people who didn't play the game, never were going to play the game, were not the audience for the game, for not playing the game they weren't meant to play, maybe blame the people who lied to you, who gaslit you and execs into putting years of your time into a project that never had any chance of success. Blame the journalists and the consultants who preach the woke gospel behind miserable failure after miserable failure. Blame your impotent leaders who still listen to them, despite billions being lost in the entertainment industry as they burn down every IP they have purchased from infinitely better people, and blame the handful of loud sycophants on social media who openly worship the DEI god yet refuse to play the games they made for the cult. We all saw this coming, but either they didn't because they're completely ignorant of what gamers want to play, or they did see it coming and they lied about it. Either way, they are and have always been the toxicity in gaming, and now everyone knows it. Journalists have hedged their bets behind Concord, Kill the Justice League, Dustborn, Forspoken, Saints Row, Redfall. There's a 7 out of 10 review from IGN for Gollum. Meanwhile, they attacked Elden Ring, Stellar Blade, Wukong, First Descendant, Palworld, and we all know this is going to continue. They have taken the double, triple, quadruple down route, and they all know the moment any of them cross over from the game's media side to the gamer's side, they're going to get eaten alive by their so-called peers. If you think the game's media cult hates gamer outsiders, get ready to watch them crucify any turncoats. Not that any of them still have any ethics or reliability. After all, they still can't figure out how Concord failed after it's dead and cold. The biggest and most disgusting lie that DEI journalists and activists have sold for the last decade is that gamers are toxic and will not play games with people of this or that. I can list all the games going back to the Nintendo Entertainment System gamers love with female leads, like Metroid and Tomb Raider. Instead though, think about how activists talk about people in the industry. In 2004, Katie would introduce herself as the level designer for Game X, and then talk about the choices she made in level design. In 2024, Katie would introduce theyself as a non-binary person of color with autism and a disability who uses the pronouns she, him, mention how proud she is of the inclusive and welcoming community of the studio, and then say all criticism of the game is welcome, but if you criticize the game, you're a bigot. Then she will put on her fursuit and play the game for 10 minutes so poorly, you realize she not only has never played the game she is making, but probably never played any video game before, ever. And then journalists will race out to her defense by claiming there is a mass harassment campaign against her, of which they will show no evidence. Gamers don't care about your personal traits. They are there for game. But if you make everything about yourself when you do interviews or on social media, you are telling people you want them to talk about you, not about the game. So journalists spent a decade forcing all game-related conversations to focus on the people in gaming companies and the journalists themselves. And recently, they got what they wanted. Gamers are finally paying very close attention to them, and now they don't want us doing it. Because when a normal person looks at games like Concord, or they see Ubisoft say they proudly hire based purely off race and gender, normal people think that's kinda messed up. While journalists try to slander Nintendo, Stellar Blade, Wukong over the type of people in their studios, gamers don't care about that. No gamer has ever looked at a game and thought, wow, this game looks amazing, or this game looks like trash. But I'm gonna base whether I play it or not solely off of how many dicks were involved in making this game. Remember the time PC Gamer rated their favorite penises in Assassin's Creed games? When Nintendo comes out with a Samus game, or a game where you are Zelda instead of Link, gamers are eager to play it. They don't think, wow, Metroid, when did Nintendo go woke? Nobody thinks Zelda is a girl just to pander, because when Nintendo makes a game, it's about making a game. You're not going to find them saying, we made a Zelda game due to Link's troubled and sexist past. No, they're gonna say, we made a Zelda game because we thought gamers would like to play the game and find it fun. The only people whining about Samus are the activists who want her to be a man. Echoes of Wisdom didn't make gamers angry that Zelda is a girl, it made journalists angry. And it's not hard to see why. Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was well received by gamers. There's a 99% like ratio on the trailer, and it proves itself to not be woke in seconds. Watch it again if you want to see a pretty clear indicator. Link defeats Ganon. A shadow spreads out to engulf him. In his last moment before vanishing, he frees Zelda from her prison. Think about that. You have a straight white man doing something heroic and capable by defeating Ganon. Strike one. Then, that straight white man takes action to save the woman he loves. Strike two. And the woman he loves is rescued due to his actions instead of freeing herself. Strike three. And I say strikes, but to get that DEI social credit score, it is one strike, you're out. A plot point like this is impossible if it were woke. It would both emasculate and degrade the legacy male lead character, and show the better female lead to not need any assistance from any man. Zelda would free herself from the crystal on her own after Link runs away with his pantaloons full of liquid brown. Stellar Blade had Eve, a brand new diverse female protagonist who is independent, smart, powerful, deadly. Wukong brought out a game with a diverse cast of animal people, numerous strong female characters. Gamers love it, journalists hate it. These are new IPs by unknown studios without excess monetization, single player, and not live service, which offer considerable high-quality gameplay, every single thing that journalists were asking for. And to top it off, neither game had the horrible whiteys that journalists hate so much. Both of them had plenty of diversity in women's, and gamers loved them. Yet journalists were furious with both of them. Gamers aren't dumb. They can see what is being done with female characters being uglified, male actors mirror their in-game model, female actresses look like completely different species from their in-game model. Gamers might not know the specifics behind all that DEI, bridge, whatever stuff, but any gamer can realize after several game failures, companies that make games they love are no longer doing it. This year's Ubisoft slop is worse than last year's. Kill the Justice League is not in the same league as the Arkham games. The Veilguard doesn't even look like the same genre as Dragon Age Origins at this point. Gamers were monkey for decades. Read review, buy game, play game, trade game back to GameStop for 10% of the price. Gamers didn't just not care about the culture war, most don't even know it exists. They don't care or know if a game was made by 50 fat lesbians in wheelchairs, as long as the game is fun to play. Most gamers weren't even aware of Gamergate, because gamers got into gaming to play games, not to get involved in social justice activism. It wasn't gamers who started the current climate, gamers tried to ignore it. Or have you journalists forgotten you were the ones talking about how you need to get educated, how you need to be aware of the social issues behind studios? It was you journalists who got an uninterested gaming public to pay attention to what was going on in the industry. And now you want people to stop paying attention? That's not how it works. People like being lazy, especially with entertainment, which is meant to be a lazy pastime. But if you force them to stop being lazy, if you drag them out of ignorance and sloth when it comes to the culture war, if you force them to pay attention to you, you don't get to complain when you get what you deserve. If you're going to force people to stop being lazy, you need a better reason than not enough women are making World of Warcraft. Well, there's plenty of them now, and Warcraft's now about losers crying about their feelings instead of burly dudes killing each other and making roads from their bones. Games media deliberately put a spotlight on themselves. While they are at their most corrupt and unlikable, articles come out that use themselves as sources. They get caught not only with access journalism, but taking bribes like paid vacations. They refuse to hold each other to account for lies. Even inattentive gamers use games media for reviews before they buy a game. At some point, even the most detached gamer sees user scores of 8s and 9s on games selling millions, which they enjoy, and journalists are giving it a 5 or a 6. On the other hand, they see journalists giving 8 or 9 to terrible games that bomb and get 3s or 4s from gamers. Journalists went after Wukong and Stellar Blade with proven lies over sexism. Stellar Blade showing off their unrealistic protagonists was modeled by a real woman, and people called out the false mistranslations of Wukong devs from deceitful journalists early on. Yet, caught in lies, did journalists apologize and correct themselves? Were journalists called out by others in the industry wanting to maintain their authenticity? No. They continued to spread the lies, while other journalists continued to repeat them. If you do not hold your industry to account, then someone else will. The Emperor has new clothes. We all know why Concord failed. Sony and journalists are making clowns of themselves right now. Games media was called out for lacking ethics during the first Gamergate, and their response was not to fix the problems and try to restore trust, but to spread their corruption to every last corner of the industry and bully everyone who notices. So instead of listening to activists, you just lost $250 million, Sony. Ball is in your court, but if you're still convinced games media is right and DEI is your future, maybe it's time to put down that ball. You know what they say, you miss 100% of the shots you take. If you liked the video, subscribe and leave a like. If you think I'm a moron, rejoice, I'm not a games journalist, so I won't be locking comments. Tell me how you feel.